Hello and welcome to this discussion of analytics and the organization. Today we'll look at how organizations attract and keep the talent they need to become data-driven. With me today are panelists who represent several facets of the talent discourse. Denis, or as we Americans like to say, Dennis Arnaud, is Senior Data Scientist at Amadeus Travel Intelligence and joins us from its headquarters in Madrid, Spain. Sam Ransbotham is an Associate Professor in Information Systems at Boston College's Carroll School of Management and Guest Editor at MIT Sloan Management Review's Data and Analytics Initiative. Tuck Rickards heads the Digital Transformation Practice at the noted recruitment company Russell Reynolds. I'm Michael Fitzgerald, a contributing editor for MIT Sloan Management Review, and I'll be moderating this discussion. While analytics is a hot technology buzzword, at the heart of today's discussion are people. Companies talk about becoming more data-driven, but achieving that status requires more than just technology. It requires leadership, culture change, and eventually the presence of analytics skills throughout a company. Today we'll see how companies are mapping their analytical future through hiring and staff development. When you look for talent, analytics talent, what do you look for?
The most challenging part is to have someone who also can see the business more broadly and can interface with the various business functions, and ideally be someone who can manage transformation and change through an organization.
It's tempting to look through a laundry list of cool new acronyms and letters and say, yeah, we want some of this, that, and the other. And one of the things I think that we face in universities is that by the time we did that, that set of acronyms would change by the time our people got onto the market. So I think the core skills are much more around inquisitiveness and not a fear of technology. I think the rest of that stuff comes from that.
Denis, how about you?
I'm looking for people feeling responsible of what they do, to be able to answer the customer requirements, to match them. And so I'm looking for people responsible, proactive, curious, and autonomous.
Yeah, pace is an impressive part of this whole thing that's underscored a lot of what we talked about is the speed at which it's going on.
The pace for individuals or for organizations?
Demand on organizations. I mean, the response time is way down.
And people talk about agile in the context of product development, but I think kind of agile in terms of a mindset in an organization works in this analytics area as well.
And is it primarily a PhD-driven field, or will we see that wane over time?
That's a signal, an imperfect signal we have of those underlying skills. As we develop, I think we'll get better ways of differentiating the people that have that underlying skill. I think right now we're using that as an indicator, which is fine, but there may be better indicators that we figure out as we mature.
And for us, if it's a data scientist now, it's probably someone with a PhD. If it's a chief analytics officer, it could be, but it could also be a quantitative background and an MBA. If it's a chief data officer, it's probably much more grounded in technology and platforms.
So what are the skills people are looking for? I mean, some of the aspects you talked about were more I would call infrastructure or the building blocks. Is that where demand you're seeing, or is it more in this interpretation?
I think there's three kinds of talent. Where we're seeing a lot of work on either side of that is more IT, platform-centric, chief data officer. How do you get the data in one place? The other end of that would be more on the kind of chief digital officer. You know, once you've got the ability to use customer insights to drive your business, how do you more drive new business strategy and transformation? So
that
one
strikes
set
me
is
is very challenging.
It's very challenging,
I think
and they all have to happen. They're all chicken and egg, right? You need each of those to develop at some level.
Yeah, you might say that technology part is necessary, but not sufficient.
Denis, Amadeus last year started a new business unit to create revenue streams from analytics and hired 20 new data scientists. You said you were swamped with applications, and this is at a time when most companies say it's hard to find data scientists. You guys made it look easy. What did you do? How did you get these people?
The way it was easy, it may be due to the fact that we are tapping on the European market, especially in Spain, where you know that unemployment rate is as high as 25%. But there is another trend. There is a shift in the budget expenses towards a research institution, and so we have a lot of PhDs now available on the market for jobs.
You're able to benefit from some of the challenges in the European economy and especially the Spanish economy, and there were sort of unemployed PhDs or underemployed PhDs, you know, working at Starbucks or whatever?
Absolutely right. So for instance, out of 10 people, Out of 10 PhDs, we have 3 astrophysicists, 1 biomedical and biology, and another one on computer science. And all those had other proposition in research institutes, but no long-term perspective, I would say. And so they would rather start a career in the industry with very good perspective.
So you said you were swamped with applications, but being swamped with applications is different than being swamped with good candidates. I'm curious, how the mix of that played out.
Out of 300 applications, we filtered out resumes. Out of that, we retained 100, I would say. And out of those 100, we interviewed, so I personally interviewed 100 of applicants. And then out of that, we retained 20, finally. It's from 300 downwards to 20. And most of them are PhD. Let me give you an example of one of PhDs, an astrophysicist. She was accepted in the European Space Agency. She worked on a satellite that would be launched in 30 years from now. So she needed a more direct contact with customers, a more direct contact with the industry than waiting 30 years to have all of life work come to fruit.
So she got to come a little more down to earth as well, instead of from satellites to planes. Tuck, you had a comment.
And I was going to ask as well, even with the labor market in Spain being what it is, unless you were launching a major new initiative, my sense is you wouldn't have attracted that level of talent, right? I think this is kind of mission-driven talent that comes to a purpose. Could you talk a bit more about the project you were bringing them on board for? Because I think without that, this may have been a different story.
In fact, we were in competition with the European market in data science, and for instance, some of the applicants went to some other company like eBay in Switzerland, or it could be Amazon in New Zealand. So really, we're in competition with other very good companies, high-profile companies in Europe, like Amazon, Google, eBay, and so on. And so, of course, to convince those applicants to come to us eventually, we need to have a good proposal. Really, my motto is like the Google one. We want to organize the information of the world, and but in Amadeus, we want to organize the travel information of the world. And when I say organize, it's more understanding that information. And so the job consists of understanding how the demand or how the supply would match the demand at some point in time, and then how the demand would react to any change in the supply in terms of price, and so things like demand elasticity. Of course, it's impossible to fully predict what will come next in terms of demand, because otherwise people would become billionaire in a few hours. Usually I say it's like happiness. It's not because it's impossible that we shouldn't try, and the most interesting thing about that is the path towards understanding the market. It's a path towards happiness.
Tuck, give us some context. They went out to hire 20 people. That sounds to me like a lot of hiring. Is this an unusual number of data scientists to try to hire more or less one time?
We've done searches where we've done 10 analytics searches for a company, but normally in an order. And our sense is there's very different roles that people are trying to hire. So we would not typically have a project to do 20 people at one time. You may have a chief data officer to get the information architecture right. You may have a chief analytics officer to do kind of the management of this kind of insights function.
I really like the idea of the heterogeneity in the roles. Well, I think we're guilty of saying, hey, let's hire a data scientist person, and that's, say, the one person that does everything, and this role aspect is huge. And it would seem like it would have to be with the volume of people. You're not going to say, all right, let's dump 40 people into a new project.
How did you bring them in and make them fit within the new culture?
We have several locations. One of them in Madrid in Spain, another one in France, around Nice in the south of France, another one in Germany. And now we are building a team in Boston, in the US, and maybe next year in Singapore, in Asia. So the idea of that is to be the closest possible to the potential customers and to the actual customers, so that we can support them the best way possible. So in Nice, we had already good research engineer and software engineers. And so we blended the newcomers, new data scientists, with the already existing research engineers. Whereas in Madrid, we started a full-blown team out from scratch. The one where there was a blend is more integrated with the rest of the company. But at the same time, the data scientists are less recognized as such, but more as classical research engineers, I would say. Whereas in Madrid, since it has been built from scratch, they are seen a little bit as aliens.
Aliens, okay.
Yeah, aliens. Yeah, and then we have a lot of work on the perceived image from the others because they are not classical. So they go to breakfast or lunch together, and that was not perceived in a positive way first because they were all together and they stick together. So the spirit among the data scientists were very good, but the communication with the rest of the business unit was more difficult. And so we had a lot of work on improving the image to be able to have people communicate with each other, with the rest of the company.
Sam and Tuck, I mean, is this cultural divide something that you run across frequently when companies are bringing in data scientists?
It's interesting because there's actually two different groups of people here that we were talking about. I thought it was interesting you took half of them from outside, and their challenge is going to be to understand the business. And then you have to take half from inside who in theory understand the business, but probably don't have the background that your astrophysicist, quintessential rocket scientist person does. So they're bringing they have a different path to get from understanding the business but not the technology perhaps, and understanding the technology but not the business. I'm curious how the rates of progress of each of those two are going. Is one faster than the other?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And then I try to set up what I call data scientist forum, where every month all the teams would do a workshop, hands-on workshop, all together in some places in Europe. So for some customer, let's say, we want to do a market analysis for some airline or for some travel agencies, and let's take that particular case of the customer and let's all work together on the different steps from the data collection up to the data visualization and through data crunching and so on. And so the one knowing the techniques would explain, and then the one knowing the business would explain, and so on. And so that we put the glue all together. And so it's very important that they share at least a few days per month the physical presence. They know each other, and then it's much easier to collaborate remotely.
I'm going to put you guys on the spot. Is this best practices, or what should they be doing? What should they have done differently?
To me, there's kind of two levels of integration, right? So there's one level of taking your existing team around data and science, the data scientists, and the new team, and bringing them together in a very open source, agile kind of mindset. That all makes sense to me. I think the harder part of what we're seeing around analytics enabling businesses is going from kind of a gut decision-based business and an existing management structure around that, and taking the data analytics and really changing the way you operate in marketing, in sales, in finance, et cetera. And I think to become a data-driven organization is a massive structural change. So the harder part is actually once you get this right and have the potential to really re-engineer a business, it's really hard to drive that next layer of change.
The bigger challenge is, what about the rest of the organization? I mean, the success that people are seeing in analytics is driving demand in areas that haven't been very data-oriented before. And while there may be a difference in the internal and external people migrating, what about the people who are very hesitant to take that approach? That's the majority of organizations out there now, and I think that's where the untapped markets are.
If I think of an organization like Amazon, which has one single view of the customer, It anticipates your every need. It's an end-to-end kind of supply chain wrapped around that customer interaction. And then if you think of most traditional businesses in financial services or retail or automotive or healthcare, they're a million miles away from that. Right?
Yeah,
So
the
I
digital
think-
natives
yeah.
are very different than the non-digital natives.
But it starts by having an analytics capability where you can have the ability to generate these insights and building these new kind of teams. But then it's a real journey to take that capability kind of across the company.
So we've been talking about your hiring of data scientists, and Sam, you hinted at this, but the data scientist gets billed as a kind of almost superhero. You put the data scientist in, and the wheels start to whir, and they're off in their corner with their screen, but can they really succeed by themselves?
Or you spend their whole day doing the janitorial type of work.
How did you avoid having your data scientists have to be also data janitors and data other things?
An astrophysicist may know almost nothing about travel and leisure market and so on. So at the same time we were hiring data scientists, we were also hiring product managers and solution managers. For instance, we hired people having a few years of experience from airlines, travel agencies, and so on, and they both work together. So in principle, when we go toward a customer, we get the requirements. And so we pair the product managers and solution managers with a data scientist team. And so typically the solution manager or product manager, knowing very well the industry, will ask the data scientist, okay, how could I draw a booking curve and do forecast on top of it? And then the data scientist will come up with a way to do the forecast on top of the booking curves. And then both learn from each other. So it's very important. Yes, the data scientists are always driven by the solution and product managers. That's very important, and that's key for them to blend.
So you connect them across the company, yeah? I mean, is that the kind
Yeah.
of thing you want to see companies doing with their data talent, not letting them be off by themselves?
Yeah, my view is that is critically important, that you've got kind of the diversity of talent around scientists and kind of industry expertise, and you line it up with the key business functions. And then on top of that, to me, the organizations that do this well, it takes kind of CEO level commitment around, we are going to really change the way that we do business. You had a big mandate to drive kind of a new analytics driven business, and that you can feel that in the organization. You can feel it through the hiring. And that kind of level of commitment, I think, is really important. These are like recruiting engineers in Silicon Valley, right? They really look for the next big technology, the next big platform, the next big cause. And once that's built, they'll often be off to the next one. So I think that piece is key.
How do you support this talent? Do you bring in data custodians so that your data scientists are actually being scientists and not spending 80% of their time organizing data, finding data?
We're seeing increasing specialization. I would argue that the technology aspects that you're mentioning being particularly hot right now are hot, but perhaps ephemeral. I think we'll get on top of that more quickly than we will get on top of the larger cultural issues. That doesn't discount it as a problem, but I think it's more of a short-term sort of a problem. Back in the software company days, you talk about problems that were big problems or problems that pizza and coffee could get around.
Right.
And pizza and coffee can get around a lot of some of the technical things, but some of the bigger cultural things are far more challenging and more long-term.
Most traditional companies are going to have pretty advanced business intelligence units, right? They're going to have people who are fairly analytical already. Do they react poorly to having these new data scientists brought in and kind of oohed and ahhed over?
Business intelligence can mean lots of things, but you'll see a lot of business intelligence in kind of a strategy planning function, to me, which is often very top-down, very look at the world and imagine the way it might be, to me, which is completely different than having real-time connectivity to your customers and your users, and being with them and being driven by how you serve them based on whether it's personalizing the next, suggesting the next product or whatever else. So the end state here becomes kind of more real-time analytics, and an organization that's wired that way, that's very different than building a good business intelligence piece into your strategy function, or just having good CRM and marketing?
It still feels to me, though, like if I'm a business, I've got a lot of people who are going to feel like they're not special because you're bringing in these other people who are special. How do you manage through that, Sam?
Yeah, no, I think that is a challenge, and I think that people are not dumb. They know how to use the better labeling to fit their new jobs, and I think they can rebrand. You might call half the people here rebranders, versus a lot of people I see are people who are coming into the field green, blue ocean types of people. But there's a lot of people who are doing kind of rebranding and rethinking, or not massive shifts, but slight shifts in what they're doing in their positioning.
Before being a data scientist, I started a research and innovation team back to 2007. And so for me, that kind of issue is not the first time I encountered it. And we had exactly the same issue, meaning we brought in some PhDs, not to do data science, but more kind of research. But it was very hard to have them accepted by the rest of the company. And as you said, there was some jealousy from the other teams. When you don't have the buy-in from the people, you must involve them as early as possible. So the way we do it now, like in the search of happiness, is to show the path to the others and to involve them. So now we go to the other teams. Okay, I have a good network within the company, within Amadeus. And so I have a lot of friends over there. And so usually I would be introduced in their teams and would say, okay, guys, what do you do today? So for instance, there is a team working on the bookings. On the distribution side of Amadeus, they collect shopping basket for travel, let's say. So I would go to that team and say, okay, what do you do with your data? Or and most of the time they would have plenty of business ideas, and then they may not know exactly how to do it, or it would be very expensive for them to acquire hardware or software to do anything about it. And then we would show them how to do it, and so that they actually do it by themselves, but with support from us. And then once we support them and they can do it by themselves, they are very happy that we were helping, and so they do no longer see us as extraterrestrials, and then they appreciate us. And it's the day they understand that we will not replace them, and the day they understand that they can do what we do, then it's much easier for us to accept them.
A lot of companies perhaps feel like they don't have internal talent. How do you figure out how much internal talent that you have? How do you assess your internal talent and decide whether you can develop inside what you need, or a lot of what you need, versus I got to call Tuck and get some advice here and have him find somebody for me?
If this is a major initiative and you're looking to kind of re-architect a business, you may be imagining roles that really didn't exist in the company, right? And so first you have to imagine what are the key lever points, and do you have anyone internally who's even qualified to do that? There's normally a set of internal candidates that would be considered along with external candidates. And I think that's a really important process, and there's often kind of learnings there, I think, on both sides. If you have someone who's technically very good and can step up with a new mandate, having someone who knows the organization and could kind of rise to that task, I think could be a great outcome.
Is it easier to go from business knowledge and add technical, or technical knowledge and add business?
I think they're both really hard. You need to be technically savvy, understand data and analytics, I think, to operate perhaps in tomorrow's kind of company. But on the other hand, being technically savvy and knowing nothing about business or organizational design just doesn't happen. So
we keep coming back to needing the superheroes.
But what happens now? So where that plays out? So where that plays out for us is that if you are looking for someone who, let's say it's a digital board member or a GM who's going to have a perspective on data and analytics, you are now seeing people who are not the most obvious candidate in terms of having run the biggest business, the most scope and scale. They may be earlier in their career. They may be really strong in these new emerging things and have had enough trajectory to show that they could run a business, and the person for the job might be the high growth person in your organization who's doing things differently instead of the person who's run the biggest business. That's a big change, right? That's not the way succession planning would always work. On the technology side, there are technical searches that are all about the platform where it just doesn't matter. You can have good people building the platform with the right guidance.
That's back to your roles.
Yeah, but these transformational roles, I mean, analytics to me, you can have a good data scientist or a group of them, but you better have someone at the top of that organization knowing what the end game is, what's the business purpose, what's the system redesign you're trying to do.
That strikes me as the harder problem.
What do you think, Dennis?
Usually the path would be from a technical background towards business background. I rarely see the other side. 1 out of 20 is the other side. So he started as an accounts manager, and then end up in a technical, so as a data scientist. But in fact, during his spare time, he always wanted to code and develop and things. So he was not a happy businessman, let's say.
Okay, I'm not a digital native. I'm running an operation where I don't know how many of my people are digital natives. This sounds like a big hairball problem to me. What do I do? How do I figure out what I really have inside to begin with and get a grasp on some of this?
There's no doubt that this will present challenges to businesses. And I think CEOs who are perhaps not digital natives themselves, I mean, what we're seeing is Fortune 500 boards bringing digital board members on board to kind of advise them on what's possible, whether it's cybersecurity or new ways to connect with your customer or whatever. We're seeing digital not just being in these analytics roles or new capabilities, but kind of every function. It's hard to imagine a marketing search where you don't expect that person to be good at data analytics, social, mobile, et cetera. It's just part of the DNA of the next generation of marketers in almost every sector.
Am I hearing you say you're going to have to write off your existing staff because they're not going to make it?
There are plenty of people who have made transformations. This is not some gee whiz thing that, oh, it's hard, it's math, or we have to get out of that mindset that these things are impossible. Everybody who's figured it out somehow. Like there's no magic that someone knows that you don't know. We're all capable of picking up a lot more of these things than we think. The technology has gotten easier. That's a point that you made. It just does not require quite as much as it used to, and I think that we ought to kind of challenge the idea that people, hey, you're not going to change. You're not going to. You are non-digital native. I think we can all embrace this.
The timing of this is really interesting, and the next 5 years are, I think, a very unique period. So the potential to transform any industry is there. Point one, and that's different than 5 years ago. Point two is, most of the CEOs running most big companies are not at all grounded in this individually. There are executives in the later part of their career, they've run big, complicated organizations. They are not digital natives. 5 years from now, I would argue when you go through succession planning in organizations like in sectors like travel or others that are being really changed, you're going to have much more digitally analytics savvy CEOs, and this will kind of merge. But right now, you really have these organizations that need to piece together good technologists that really don't yet get the business and committed senior leaders who kind of empower this and pull it forward. But it's a really, I think, once in a lifetime seismic kind of change. I mean, this to me feels from a talent perspective, an industrial, agricultural revolution-like period of change.
So you see an end to it, which actually I can push back on that and say, well, it's just going to raise the bar, and then 5 years from now, there's going to be a new technology that comes out that they're not understanding. Like an analogy is spell check. Nobody thinks that spell check is gee whiz anymore. It's what everything does. But isn't analytics going to be the spell check of a decade from now?
See, I view this differently because I don't think this is about technology at all, but what technology now allows, right? And to me, I think when we look at these three things connected, kind of mobile, so everybody's connected real time, that's very different. Social, where things are two ways, it's not just customers pushing or companies pushing things out, it's really two-way connectivity. And then analytics, where you really have real-time data flowing through the system, that changes fundamentally the premise on which you can build a business.
We hear a lot about democratizing analytics. So how data-driven are companies really going to get? Is every employee going to get access to all of this data? And if so, how do we equip them?
First thing to have is a good lawyer, meaning a positive lawyer, to be sure that what you do with data is legal and moral, of course.
I think it brings up a huge set of challenges that we haven't really thought about yet. From a managerial standpoint, we see what happened with Sony and the storage of data and retention. I do from the purist in terms of, hey, we don't need to do the ETL that we used to. That makes a lot of sense. Hey, just keep everything and we'll sort it out later. I think we've got a lot to learn about how that plays out. There may be lots of efficiencies in not storing everything for later.
In the old days, everyone in your small town knew what you were doing. I think you have to assume personally and as a company that kind of transparency in general is a given, and you have to operate well in that world. The other piece is beyond the legal aspects of what you can do. I think companies now possess huge amounts of data, and how do you create kind of a policy around what are the boundaries where you can use that to do good and create new opportunities for your customers or new markets, and what are the boundaries beyond legal where it's you really need to safeguard that and you have a responsibility. So I think there's a huge responsibility inside of this in terms of how companies.
Yeah, there's a can do and a should do, and those are very different questions. And maybe historically we may have been limited by can do, and I think maybe we found the can do keeps increasing, and we maybe need to think about should do a little bit more.
It's been a great discussion, actually, of issues that are facing companies as they try to develop more data-driven cultures. So I want to thank our panelists, Denis Arnaud of Amadeus Travel Intelligence, Sam Ransbotham of Boston College and MIT Sloan Management Review, and Tuck Rickards of Russell Reynolds. This is Michael Fitzgerald saying thank you for being with us, and we'll see you again soon.